Tuk mua e whangamari e koen, ke whai hano whakanofo e tau ki Polokalama ki mua patato kamata. Takpe ik no pere, kone hiripe haku whakarea koeni, te u kōrerewa ki he CEO, tokon CEO, Paula lo amanu, koe pure e wa ngāwe ki he savea ki tofi api, ke ne whakahoka tau lotu, pe koe ne hiripe ko ia, pe a whakahoko rewa e lotu ia fitu, ai mea taitari, pe a hoko atu ki he presentation ko ia o e aho, whakahoko ia e palofesa Syncronin, pe a whai pe mo e tari mo e whihui mo e tari, pe a pehe, mona whakamā pōpo, pe toki awhangatuku atu i he CEO, Rosamond Ping, i ne osi, pe toki tāpuni aki, hatau lotu tuku. I taimi tatau, ko whe whakahape ki he ke moitolu mo mea mai he hauani, o kia pe mo e whahinga ku nau mea mai mei muri, mei Nusila, te nau iai pe nau ngahi whehu i he taimi koe whae whakawhehu i, ki whakaatāpe haki taimi mo ngahi whehu i ka te.
Tēnā koutou katoa, malo lele, and malo opito. I thank you, Lord Tueofitu, for welcoming me here and hosting me here. I also thank Rosamund Bing, the CEO from Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, for all of her help in facilitating what we're doing. Deputy Director Taniela Kula for all the on-ground support, and all of the staff of the Tonga Geological Services who have worked alongside me over the last 2.5 months. So before I start to talk about some of the scientific information and become excited by this, I want to just acknowledge the stress and harm that this eruption has placed on the Kingdom of Tonga, and I know that many of you have suffered personally from this, and there are many people that are still traumatized by these events. So I wish to acknowledge that this has been a terrifying experience, and for many people a once-in-a-lifetime experience that they never want to see again. So I hope that in seeing some of the images and work today, that this is not bringing back any of that stress, and I hope that I can help to answer some of the questions that you may have regarding why this such a big and terrible thing happened here. So I will be presenting today some of the results from different parts of our field work over the last while. This is work that we have only been able to do here, and it contributes to international science. So there are many people working in international science on all aspects of this eruption, because it has been one of the largest events that, as we heard this morning, as one of the largest events over the last 140 years. This means enormous international attention. But much of that work depends on knowing what has happened on the ground, and that has been the focus of our work. So we will be talking about a series of different studies that we have done. I will start by talking about what we have learned from the eyewitness views, and many of you experienced this eruption, and you experienced it in different ways. All of the ways that you've experienced this have been valid, and by gathering information from different people and different people's perspectives, we have actually learned very valuable things about what made this eruption so violent, but also what we can learn from this event that will help us in the future. We also revised and looked at some of the assumptions around volcanoes and how they work. This is both internationally but also locally. We looked at ground data from ash mapping, ground data from tsunami mapping, and we also looked at and analysed data that we have collected in the years before this event. So I have been working with Taniela and his predecessors in his role in the Tongan Geological Services on volcanic hazards in the Kingdom of Tonga since about 1999. And so we have many experiences from the past that we can draw upon, and the geologic knowledge we can draw upon. We also conducted the first marine survey on top of the caldera of Hunga, and we have some startling new results which I'm hoping will impress you and also help you to understand why this event was so significant. And I will talk then about what are some of the ongoing implications of these findings. So these are photographs from an eyewitness who was on a boat just north of Tongatapu during the eruption. And they are important because they capture moments in time during the eruption. They help us see that at the beginning, this eruption was actually quite normal. This was a normal type of event that has been familiar to many of you from Hunga over the last years. 2014, 2015 were many of these such eruptions, and the beginning of this eruptive phase can be traced back into December of last year. Now, this initial eruption very quickly changed. So you can see the time here. Only a few minutes later, suddenly this very big mushroom cloud tells us that we have a rapid change in explosion. Another very significant thing from my view is a few minutes later at 5:25 p.m. we have this very large cloud, but my attention is drawn below the cloud to these smaller clouds that are radiating outwards. It's easy to overlook them because this big cloud is so large, but these are on a radius of many tens of kilometres surrounding the volcano, and they record ash currents that are moving laterally, moving away from the volcano, across the ocean surface and also below the ocean surface. And it is these currents that have been responsible for many of the major tsunami impacts that we've seen. Also, sonic booms. And so in this one here, there are these subtle clouds that are just drifting down like this. I'll just put some lines in to emphasize them. These are sonic booms, and so those subtle lines that are traveling across the atmosphere is where water vapor is being squashed down into bands. So these enormous sonic booms, and then later obviously the enormous tsunami, and then later again the ashfall were the major things that went on during the first eruption. So overall the eruption actually took 11 hours, and there were 4 main phases of the event. The most important phase was at the beginning and in the first 2 hours of the eruption. And as I say, sudden changes at 5:15 and 5:25 were sudden accelerations of the violence of the eruption. These changes indicate now that we know our field studies and our marine studies, that new magma was rising. The magma was about 7 kilometres below the volcano, and it was rising rapidly, and it was meeting seawater that was entering the top of the volcano, because the top of the volcano and the central part was cracking apart. Now that cracking apart allowed seawater to get into the magma, and then we had a series of these very violent explosions. So we now know that the rise and spread of this eruption was up to 2 times faster than the next biggest one that was on record from Pinatubo in the Philippines in 1991. And so just in the bottom corner of this graph you see a rise rate plot of Pinatubo, and then the Hunga one was much faster, the faster growth in height and also width of the plume. And this shows just how incredibly violent this eruption was. We had many questions as to why this was, because it did not initially seem like there was enough ash to cause this, or enough volume of ash to cause this effect. The other thing, and this is a plot of lightning, and there was more lightning detected during this event than any other event around the world. So it's not a surprise that many people are still frightened by thunder and lightning storms following this eruption. So the first models to explain this type of event require a quick mixing of seawater and magma. The most logical way of doing that is for the side of the volcano to collapse away. And so all of our initial assumptions were leading towards either a very large caldera explosion, which was seeming less likely, and more likely a big landslide or collapse. But we have now confirmed that that was not the case. And so the outside flank of the volcano has not collapsed, and that's also shown by the work that was presented by the National Institute of Water and Atmosphere Research from New Zealand yesterday. So we have concluded that the eruption was instead driven by internal magma pressures along with the magma-seawater interaction. But this was augmented by the very sudden inward collapse of the volcano to create a caldera. So the Hunga volcano is intact, but it looks very different to what it used to look like. So the first part of our study, and this was during lockdown when most people were still at home, we were actually travelling around the country and we were measuring ash, and we were measuring its thickness, its grain size. We were sending samples to New Zealand for chemical analysis, and this is all towards impact assessment, agricultural impact assessment, drinking water health assessment, as well as understanding the physics and the explosion of this event. And so here's Lena and I out collecting ash samples. And so we went to over 130 sites all around Tongatapu on the small islands to the north, as well as to the Ha'apai group of islands. So we were feeding this information all the time back to our network of international colleagues, in this case Dr. Larry Maston and Dr. Alexa Van Eaton from the United States Geological Survey, and they were trying to develop new ashfall models that would explain this type of event. So the existing ashfall models and the hazard models were not working. They did not explain this event, and so this type of work we had to develop new models, and for the new models we need the data on the ground. We can't just make the models out of nothing. And so all along, and so these are the new plots that came to me about an hour and a half before I got here from Larry, and this shows the impact of trying to figure out how high the plume was on the distribution of ash. So you can see in this case a lot of ash distributed to the south, and this was not realistic based on our measurements. This one here, a lot of it distributed to the west, a little bit closer to our measurements, and this one here with the ash quite concentrically, much more close to our measurements. And this tells us that a lot of the ash, even if the high part of the plume was 58 kilometres, a lot of the ash was probably around the 30 kilometre high range. So what we've been able to do with the ground-based measurements, quite humble measurements out there with a brush and shovel, not exactly high-tech, but we were able to then put that into very high-tech models to make it much easier for us to forecast these hazards in future. So the next step of the work was looking at the tsunami run-up, and here we go a little bit more high-tech, but again, the type of technology that you have and you use regularly, and the Ministry of Lands and the Survey Department are also very familiar with. So we were using differential GPS methods, and we were out there measuring the run-up and the height that the tsunami waves reached in different parts of the kingdom. Now, a lot of international people were buying very high quality satellite data, and they were able to look at the satellite data and estimate run-ups from that. The big problem with satellite data is that you can see things on a spatial extent, but you cannot see the height. This means that when you do put this information into tsunami models, you have no control on how high it went. Because from the top, a very steep island looks quite similar to a flat island. And that's basically why we actually had to go and physically measure the run-ups. The other things that are very important for us to measure are indications of how high the water level was above the ground. So during this work, we visited something like 80 different locations around Tongatapu, on Whawha, Atata, Numoka Iki, Tongoa, Whanoi, Mango, all of these different sites, and we were measuring everywhere the height the tsunami reached, but also the depth of the water. And we can measure the depth of the water by picking out marks in the trees, debris being left up in the trees, and also by talking to people as we went to places and getting eyewitness information. So that took us a long time. That was a very long and complicated survey. But this is data that will now go into the much, much better warning models, much better land use models as well. And so what we can see from this initial look of this data is just in Tongatapu, obviously the wave heights were much bigger on the western side, on the kind of Kupulu Peninsula, and they were still quite large on the southern coast as well, and they were smaller along the northern coast because the wave had broken earlier and moved around the northern part of Tongatapu because of the reef complex to the north. And so let's put this into some context here, the same sort of information now plotted. We had actually quite big run-ups on the western side, and these are very unusual because we are so far away from the volcano, and yet the tsunami run-ups are so large. This is globally an unusually large tsunami. The wave travelled down the southern coast and also produced very high run-ups in places, and then it hit Ewa, and then there was some return flow as well. And also, interestingly, the wave hit the Tongatapu at different times. In Ha'apai, the story is similar. Most of the southern and western islands had very high run-ups, and as we went further north, the run-ups are a little bit lower. So what we can see from this and now from our field surveys is that the tsunamis were generated by a mechanism of explosion and also by the mechanism of these laterally spreading currents of pyroclastic debris. This is a very unusual mechanism, and also everything we'll be learning from here we will actually be able to put into helping other volcanically vulnerable parts of the world. So one of the big outputs from this, and there are several different groups that are doing tsunami run-up modelling. There is a Japanese research group, there are some two or three different American research groups. SPC is also having a group doing some modelling. This is one in particular, a group of professors from the University of Southern California and also University of Miami, who have been using our information as we day by day get new information, and have been fine-tuning a model for tsunami. And so over here we've got a very spectacular tsunami model. Hopefully I can make it run. There we go. And you can see the waves coming down, impacting on the western side of the Kupulu Peninsula. And if you notice, there was an initial wave that came first, and then the secondary wave that came through, and the flow heights that we're seeing from these simulations are very similar and closely matching what we are finding in the field. So there are currently some important differences between our measurements and the simulations on the western side of Tongatapu, and so we are now this is a model that's going to be developed even further. But you can see the power of these kinds of models are that we can both visualize the impact of these events, but we can now forecast using similar types of eruption scenarios what tsunamis might then do in the Kingdom of Tonga from different volcanoes at different times. So this is really what we're trying to go towards. So again, relatively humble methods in the field, progressing further on into much more sophisticated modelling of impacts and hazard. So we move on to some of the recommendations that we just wanted to put forward here regarding tsunami. And those of you who have been out to the west and seen the incredible damage and seen that the coast looks so different to what it did before, it's a tragedy, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to think about how development proceeds in such locations. So this is all in your hands, obviously, and the ideas that I'm putting forward here are just merely some suggestions. But these are some considerations that could be put together when understanding and what might go on in the future on the west and in other low-lying parts of Tongatapu. So one of the things I would recommend that's easy to do now is to plant trees. And whilst trees aren't the most efficient tsunami blocking mechanism, what we did notice in all the places that were heavily forested, not with coconut palms, but with large trees, mango trees and various other trees, what we were noticing was that very rapidly these debris dams would build up. And if you've been out west, you will have noticed a lot of these big debris dams up behind Samalatane and all these other places. And these debris dams actually protected inland areas from further damage because they break the energy of the wave. So the trees they break down, they all interlock, they create these log dams, and that really does protect further inland areas. So those are things that are relatively simple to do. Some of the other considerations around land use planning are going to be much more complicated and beyond the abilities of a scientist to talk about. So now I'm going to move on to Hunga itself. And I just want to explain to you what Hunga looked like before the eruption. So a couple of surveys were carried out before the eruption. We were here with Taniela's team in the end of 2015, and we conducted a survey on the caldera using the Pacific Rose, one of the boats from Pacific Sunrise Fishing. And the results of the survey are here, and here we have the top part of the volcano. The other survey that was completed a year later was by the research vessel Falcore, which was diverting here after another mission wasn't successful. But they accidentally, more or less, collected some more information of the volcano. So this is the Falcore survey over this side, and you can see this is the volcano. There's no vertical exaggeration here, so it looks a little bit flat. But down here is about 1,000 metres below sea level, and up here is about 40 or 50 metres below sea level. And we've got this black area here, which is where the old islands were. This black area here, which was a reef and low shallow water. And the central part, which was the deepest part of the caldera. And so this is our survey that we conducted here. Again, the island here is Hunga Ha'apai, Hunga Tonga. This is the middle part that was created during the eruption in 2014, 2015. It was 120 metres above sea level. And the southern area was all very shallow water. You can see how thin this line is as the boat's gone over here. And we weren't able to survey this because the water was too shallow, mostly 10 metres to 20 metres. So a big shallow area in the southern part of the top of the volcano. And overall, the volcano was actually quite flat. There was the deepest part here in blue, and this deep part here in blue was about 140 metres deep, 150 metres deep at the most. So there was a deep portion here, and you can see it here, a deep portion here, and on this side is the, again, the Hunga Ha'apai and Hunga Tonga, and the 2014-2015 thing, and the deep part here 150 metres. That deep basin accounts to something like 1.2 cubic kilometres, which is quite large, but you'll see soon that that's a small number. Did I skip something there? Nope, sorry. So just to recap, we've got this previous surface where there's the 2014-2015 cone, the Hunga Ha'apai, Hunga Tonga, the deep portion, the shallow portion to the south, and over here we have the bathymetry information that we collected from marine mapping in 2015, and you see that's rotating around. We've got the deep part of the caldera here, only 150 metres deep. We've got these islands here which are occupying the north, and we've got a big area in the south that's also very, very shallow. And around the rim you'll notice these little dots, and these are old cones from small eruptions that have happened over the last few decades. So this is what the volcano looks like now. So what we have now is a very large hole in the ground. You probably don't even recognize this from that previous picture. So this is Hunga Tonga over here, just this little gap in the coverage. This is what's left of Hunga Ha'apai over here. Earlier on, when we visited this location, we've already announced that Hunga Ha'apai is only 25% of its initial size, and Hunga Tonga is only about 10% of its initial size. The reason these are so small is that the bulk of these islands have actually collapsed into the middle of the volcano. Hunga Tonga collapsed in this way, Hunga Ha'apai collapsed in this way. So we're looking from the northwest here, or north-northwest, and we can see that actually the place that Hunga Tonga sits on top of and the place that Hunga Ha'apai sits on top of is still quite similar. The big southern platform, parts of it are still there. There are some big drainage valleys to the east and to the north that were previously also there in our 2015 survey. What is totally new is this great big caldera in the middle, 4 kilometres across and about 860 metres deep. And you'll see very, very steep slopes all around the edges of this. So the upper part of the volcano is between 30 and 80 metres deep below the surface, so the parts in red, and the parts in yellow are about 280 metres, the parts in green 500 metres deep, the parts in blue over 800 metres deep. So huge hole, and actually quite flat in the middle, because after the eruption much of the material fell back down. So this is a little view into the volcano. So we're just circling around the western flanks of the volcano. There's the deep valley to the north. We're circling around towards the east now, and we're looking down onto the central part, and you can see how steep and jagged that internal part of the caldera is. This is very unstable slopes on the inside part of that caldera, and what we can see is this top of the volcano has fundamentally changed. Everything about the shape of the inside of the volcano has changed, even though, as we also saw from the data from National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research, the outside part of the cone hasn't had as much change. So this was, when we first saw it on the boat, was really astonishing to us. We were absolutely blown away by how deep and how fundamental the change has been on Hunga, but it helps us to understand why the eruption was so very, very large. So here's our pre-eruption view, 160 metre deep, and most of this very shallow. You can see the southern part of the rim is still there. You can also see where the 2014-2015 cone is now just a big hole, or part of the hole. There is a valley here, but it's still present. There is a valley to the north, and it's still present. But the big difference is this enormously deep hole here, which is in our Pacific Horizon survey. So I just wanted to point out the same features here. Number one, the southern ridge is present. Number two, this western side of the volcano seems fairly similar to what it was before. Number three, this channel is deeper, but it is still very similar to what was there before. Number four, the channel to the west, to the east is a little deeper than it was before. And the other thing is these little red triangles. These were cones that we saw on the bottom of the ocean floor. So each of these were individual little volcanoes that were erupting in 1937 and 1988 and 2009 and so on. They have all now been completely buried. So everything is very smooth here, and it's smooth because they've all been buried by this pyroclastic debris that has gone out sideways from the eruption. So the central part of the caldera here, drawn in a dotted line, this is representing a volume change, and these are preliminary numbers that we've calculated. We'll do some much more detailed calculations when we do the before and after differencing. But our preliminary calculations tell us around 6.5 cubic kilometres of material has been removed from the central part of this caldera. That's a minimum because the bottom of the caldera is actually very flat, so lots of deposits are sitting in there. And so the real base of the caldera is probably 100 metres or so deeper. So we have a very large amount of volume that has moved. As Lord Tuiawhitu was mentioning, if we scraped all of the Tongatapu down to sea level just to fill in this hole, we would only get about 2/3 of the way there. We could add Ewa, we still wouldn't fill up the hole. This is a very large number. It's very difficult to envisage 6.5 cubic kilometres. But this very large number means that we can now explain why the tsunamis were so violent, why there was this global shockwave, and it also puts this eruption into the category of the so-called Volcanic Explosivity Index, or VEI 6. So most of the volume of this eruption, however, didn't go into the ash. It seems to have gone into these currents that spread sideways from the volcano, and these have been what has caused so much of the tsunami waves being so high and so much damage there. And so here's another picture, an eyewitness picture, and you can see the plume here, but at the bottom these pyroclastic flows travelling sideways that are so violent. So this is just a quick recap, and here's the 2014-2015 cone, 120 metres, now it's 400 metres below sea level. So what we know, though, is this cone actually disappeared on the day before the big eruption. So we know that this caldera collapse probably now began a day before the big eruption, and it was probably part of the process leading to the big eruption of the 15th. So this is quite an important observation to tell us what kind of warnings that we should be looking out for in future from similar volcanoes. And believe me, we have several similar volcanoes in the Kingdom of Tonga. You just need to look up the chain toward Tofua or towards Letiō and others. So the Honga rim has been buried by new material, and it's all smooth now compared to what it used to look like, as we described before. But the outer rim so far appears to be stable, which is really good news, because that means that we're not likely to see major collapses from the outer rim at the moment. So this is a source of relief, because one of the things I was concerned about was, had the external part of the volcano collapsed, there would have been a lot more potential for ongoing collapse. What is going on, though, is inside the caldera, the collapses are continuing. And this is because inside the caldera, it is very, very steep and unstable. And so you can see here these things that look like bite marks. This is a bite mark. There's another bite mark. There's another one on this side, another one on that side. These are very large landslides, and they actually occurred after the caldera collapse, because you can still see the top of the landslide debris just above the number 3 there. And when you look at the detailed data, this is just a smoothed version, you can actually see that after the caldera fell in, these walls are actually gradually sliding inwards. And so this collapse here is actually quite large, almost 1/10 of a cubic kilometre. So ongoing collapses of this type will create local tsunami waves and local currents, particularly close to Hunga. So vigilance around Hunga and vigilance in the vicinity of Hunga is still required, because that landscape is still readjusting. So that submarine landscape is readjusting as ongoing collapses will carry on. The other thing that we have noticed, and this was hinted at yesterday by the National Institute of Water and Atmosphere Research, they noted some ash in the water column outside the caldera and inferred that there was ongoing volcanic activity. Well, we can prove that that's actually true, and that inside the caldera, especially along this area encircled here in the northwest, there are many small eruptions going on at the moment, or going on at the time of our survey. These are just 2 of them, but there were many sites along there where there are small eruptions. So you can see in this upper one here, right here, we've got this is the ground surface, or the ocean surface, 140 metres below sea level, and this plume is gas and particles that is driving up from a small eruption column that's about 60 metres high in the ocean, on the ocean floor, and there's gas bubbles rising up above it. Another one here, another plume with particles and gas. And you can see this one here with the blue material cascading downwards. So those are solid particles, dense solid particles that are actually being erupted here and dropping downwards into the side of the caldera. And you can see how irregular the surface is here. So this part of the caldera is not only going to be continually collapsing, but there is ongoing small-scale eruptions happening there. And so these low-level, probably continuous eruptions are normal after we've had such a large amount of magma erupted, but they do indicate that there is ongoing potential hazard associated with ash and pumice plumes and rafts, and potentially small, more energetic phases could cause some local hazards like local tsunami waves and currents. So the volcanism at a small scale is continuing, but I do want to emphasise that the enormity of this caldera, the massive change that's taken place, means that we are very unlikely to see large-scale eruptions again for the next few hundred years at least. The volcano needs to build back up again to a shallow level to be able to be having that great big potential. That is why when we look at the long-term view of the volcano, we recognise that these large events happen on this volcano only every 900 years or so. This volcano is very similar to some of the others along the Tongan Arc, though, and so we would expect the same kind of behaviour from some of the other shallow submarine ones. So that's the last part of the presentation, and I just want to acknowledge many people that have helped with this work. Many people in New Zealand, my team in the University of Auckland, also the Pacific Sunrise Fishing, all these people that have helped me with designing the survey, with interpreting the data, with asking for specific types of data, and also sharing with us the results of their models that they developed with the work that we do here. So international science collaboration is not always straightforward. Many scientists are busy running there trying to get the headline for things, but in this case we've had a lot of very good and healthy collaboration to get us towards where we're understanding now. So at this point I thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you've understand what I've been able to explain today, and I hope it helps give you some feeling of closure, or at least some feeling of understanding for the momentous events that have affected the Kingdom of Tonga. So, malo pito.
Thank you very much, Professor Shane Cronin. Ko whainga maare koe ni, o ku tuku atuia ki he lokini, pape ki he ka umitia, ko whaiangongo, ki ahana o whihui panau, o mai he taimini. Ko e whakatokanga atue, ko ki taimi, mahalo ko ne tolu tau noa pe, o ku e lere atua ik minister, ki whatongi eta, ka ko e whainga maare koe ni, ki he taimi ko ate, atu ke ngai whihui. Ia, Lala?
Hello, Pito. The question I have for you, Professor Shane, is with the inside the Kodia wall that keeps collapsing and mini eruptions. I think what the nation wants to know with these mini eruptions and mini tsunamis that's going to be caused by the collapse of the wall or the Kodia is that every 900 years, is that what people are going to be basing? Is the volcano on dormant right now, or because I know everybody is still wondering when's going to be the next eruption and stuff. I think that's just to reassure the public that's listening.
Yeah, that's a good point, and we can never say for sure with volcanoes, but what we can say in this case, from our geological studies at this volcano, every 900 years it builds up to producing this very large event. So we saw the last one around 1100 AD. This was based on using radiocarbon dates, and the previous one before that was around AD 200, again based on radiocarbon dates of the materials erupted. In between, there have been smaller eruptions, many smaller eruptions, but ones of the scale that would affect Tongatapu and Ha'apai group of islands, I would expect there to be none of that scale for many hundreds of years, and mainly because the caldera is now so deep, and so the main vent, if you like, is in that deep part of below the ocean. So even if new magma comes up, there is this big weight of water on top of it, which stops it from being explosive. And so the types of impacts I've been talking about around the small collapses and the small eruptions, that is if you are nearby there in a boat, or you are fishing or working around that place. Away from that volcano, as far away as Tongatapu and Ha'apai, we would expect not to have any impacts from those small events.
Sorry, Shane, can I just ask another one? With the tsunami model that you mentioned on your presentation, how confident are you that Daniela and his team, and also with the government of Tonga, how confident are you that that model is good for Tonga, especially with the local tsunamis that will most likely get with the caldera walls that keeps collapsing?
Yeah, so this is one of about 3 different models that's currently in development. They're all converging on quite similar types of results. And so these are the sorts of things where having 3 or more models is really helpful, because we can compare them and compare them against the real event data. So obviously we have real event data from this one event, but we also have some real event data from historical events as well. So we can compare these to the different types of impacts. Tsunami can be also generated by tectonic events and also by trench earthquakes, but it's quite clear that there are many deposits on the western side of the island that represent past eruptions. So this is probably as best as we've ever been able to forecast these kinds of hazards. So Daniela and his team are able to put this kind of information straight into some land use recommendations. But this will happen over the next few years as we get other models and other information online. And I'm thinking particularly of quite advanced modelling from Japanese scientists, and also there's a series of models that are being run by NIWA in New Zealand as well.
Sorry, Shane, I just have one more. Sorry to my fellow media colleagues while I'm here. This is my last one. With the consideration for the western side of the island, especially the low-lying areas, I know you mentioned that to plant trees, and I know you couldn't touch into details on the other consideration. Is the government going to be doing the considerations that you have for the low-lying areas and the western side of Tonga, especially with a tsunami, especially for potential tsunami warning? Or
I'm probably not the right person to answer that, but at least we're discussing this, and everybody is really seeing the benefits of this kind of information at this particular time, where there is a bit of a turning point in terms of how development could proceed in the future.
Malo apito, Professor Shane, of all the years you have working in this field and your expertise, what are your thoughts on the aftermath on the volcanic eruption?
I guess my main thought is how fortunate and how responsive and resilient the population has been. So it was remarkable that whilst there were fatalities and there has been major infrastructure and housing damage, we were envisaging hundreds, if not thousands, of lives lost from the scale of this eruption. So there were elements of luck in terms of the eruption occurring in the afternoon and being witnessed, but it's not automatic for people to run from the coast. This is a result of education, of training, of natural background knowledge, traditional knowledge, all of these things put together. And it meant that when people fled the ocean and made for high ground on that afternoon, even though everything started getting dark and was terrifying, that actually was an action that saved so many lives. And so that was one thing that I found extremely remarkable from this eruption. When I first got here, I was astonished by how well everyone had picked up and carried on from the ashfall, because it was also a very significant amount of ashfall. Yes, I was very sobered once I went to the west and started seeing the scenes of damage there. And the type of damage there, and now the trees being gone, it actually is even more vulnerable than it was before. So those are things that I still weigh on my mind about the future safety. Not necessarily where the villages are. I think some of the villages are located quite well because they're behind the main beach ridge. But along the beach face and along the beach front, where many resorts were located, these places are actually at even more risk than they were before because of the lack of trees and any other protection structures over there.
Thank you, Professor Cronin, for the most interesting findings about our volcanic eruption. In fact, I had no idea it was like that, but coming over today is most interesting to find out about all the surveys and the hard work that you people have done. Now, I was given this question to ask. Your opinion on the mechanism of submarine cable break. Did pyroclastic density currents under the sea reach the sites of breakage?
Yes, I believe they did. They weren't. Once they go under the sea, they transform. So pyroclastic density currents. These are I was describing these currents of material that go sideways from the volcano. Think of them as being made up of ash and rocks, but it's very hot when it's released from the volcano. Some of that material, the fine-grained material, travels along the surface of the ocean, and some of it actually goes below the ocean. And when it goes below the ocean, it's made up of this dense material, these dense particles and rocks and ash, and that travels along the ocean floor as we call a turbidity current or a gravity current, and that can travel a very, very long distance. So these currents can travel, in some places, 300 or 400 kilometres. So it is not surprising that these flows below the ocean were able to travel so far. The other reason why it's not surprising to me that they happened like this and created the damage to the cables was that the eruption over a period of 2 hours was almost continually producing these sideways currents. So it's not just one current that's going down, it's like continuously supplying these currents. It's like turning the hose on and then keeping the hose on. Those currents keep going, and that helps them travel so far. And that is why I think the currents, particularly in the low-lying position of the cable that runs between Tongatapu and towards Ha'apai and Oatu, that was why there was so many breakages along that line. The one that did surprise me was the breakage in the south, the one that goes from Tongatapu towards Fiji. But now seeing some of the mapping that the Niwa people have done outside the volcano, they have been able to see the pyroclastic materials lining the valleys heading towards the south, and so that explains why both sets of cables were broken. I think this eruption has probably opened our eyes more to that type of problem, and this type of volcano, and Tofua is another one, but there are others similar to this in Vanuatu. They have a composition of magma which is actually producing very dense materials. So you also have noticed in many past eruptions in Tonga the floating pumices, like the ones that come from Letiō or something like this. That's got more silica, and so it produces these pumices that float. But Hunga, Tofua, Kau, Late, these volcanoes, they're actually what we call basalt or basaltic andesite, and they produce very dense materials. So when you have a big eruption like this, they're always going to produce these sideways travelling currents, and we see that in the deposits around volcanoes like Tofua as well. So it's a big lesson for us in terms of tsunami production and also submarine cables.
You know, looking at that picture now,
Yeah.
where around is the caldera?
In this particular picture, the caldera, we're on the outside of the caldera here, so where the boat is on the outside of the caldera. There's Hunga Tonga. The caldera is on this side. Yeah, inside here. Yeah. So when you go from Tongatapu towards Hunga, you first go across the caldera before you get to these islands. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Cronin. As you have mentioned earlier, the caldera, do you think, is there any possibility that the deepness of the caldera will suppress underwater any future explosion from the Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai, or will it influence any low explosive in the future?
I think the great depth of the caldera will suppress explosivity, so it would mean the future eruptions would be more, let's say, gentle and more building up of lava on the ocean floor. But what we have also noticed is that some eruption vents are on the caldera wall as well at shallower elevations, and so they could produce pumice rafts and so on as well. But not very, very big eruptions. They would come from more the base of the caldera.
Shane, you mentioned there are small eruptions occurring at the moment. So can you be a bit specific about, because the public were afraid, they think there is a big eruptions going on sooner?
Yeah, there's no chance for a big eruption because the caldera is so deep. So the small eruptions that are going on at the moment are like geysers, or they're like submarine geysers or something like that, or small submarine eruption columns. So if they were above on the ground, then they're the sort of eruptions that you could sort of go and look at. You could look at them on the other side of the room, that kind of size, but still, 60 meters high, so you wouldn't get up very close to them, but they're not the sort of thing that will damage or cause any problem away from the volcano. And in fact, even on the volcano, on the top of the water above them, you don't even notice them. We went across the top of them in the boat many times, and we didn't even know that they were happening until we see them on the sonar. So they're very gentle in that respect.
Professor, does those small eruptions can generate another strong eruption in the future?
No, those small eruptions, think of them as being like a bit of a safety valve as well. So there's, if you've got a pressure cooker and the vent is open, then you can have some small steam coming out. But if you close the pressure cooker, then you build the pressure. So in these cases, what's happening after the big explosion is that you've got some small amount of magma left over, and it's producing this gas, these small events. So they are releasing that gas, and they are releasing the pressure below. So as long as it stays like this, then there's no major threat. And for it to change, we would need many hundreds of years of build-up of magma before that happens. So no chance for a big one at the moment.
Thank you.
Professor, the survey that was done in 2015, just like you to just talk more on that survey. Did you guys notice anything in 2015 that could have indicated that in 2022 it would be an eruption at this magnitude?
So the two things that we did notice that we drew attention to at the time was that there was evidence for uplift going on in the caldera. And that evidence for uplift was we saw fresh coral that was above the sea level. And that was on the Hunga Tonga, on the coastline of Hunga Tonga. And we saw evidence of several meters of uplift of this fresh coral. So it was hard to date that fresh coral because it's quite young material, so there's no good methods for dating it. But it looked as if over the last decade or so there had been uplift. Now when we look back, with the 2020 hindsight, we know now the big event happened, but when we look back, we can say, right, over the historic time, the number and the size of the past eruptions were increasing. So we had an eruption in 1912, one in 1937, one in 1988, and they were quite small. 2009, there was quite a decent-sized one. 2014-15, it was actually quite a bit bigger. And then at the beginning of this one, in December of 2021, we were thinking it looks like similar to the previous ones. Now, after the big event, we look back and we think, right, that whole volcano was probably building itself up. That's why the top of the volcano was so flat in 2015. It's like blowing up a balloon. You're building the volcano up. At the time, we also recognized from the radiocarbon dating that there was a very large eruption at AD 200, another one at AD 1150, and we suggested that, yes, in the geological future, another one could happen. But going from a geological description to a prediction on a week-by-week scale is currently impossible anywhere in the world for volcano studies. But so we recognise stuff, but we now have hindsight to see the signs that we didn't see back then.
Ko e mea taritari me whahoko atua ek minista pe potungawe lo tu a fitu ka pehe foki a hono whakaha koia a e savea koe ni e ahoni whahoko atua e Professor Shane Cronin nei he University o Kalani New Zealand tau mua koia pe koe ka veinga a e Polokalama koe ni ka first view into Hunga submarine volcano and results of Tongan based